Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's virtual session. My name is Emily Wolfram. I am the Executive Director of the Montana Performing Arts Consortium. And this organization is a network of performing arts professionals who work together to strengthen access to transformative live performances all over Montana. And we are an association with membership. Our members include performing arts organizations from throughout the state of Montana, as well as arts service organizations and nonprofit service organizations. And also artist agents and managers and affiliate organizations like schools and libraries, symphonies, and other types of nonprofits that incorporate live performance into their various activities and programs. Our main priority is connecting Montana communities with really excellent performing arts programs, and we do that by providing our members with resources that help them do what they need to do, which is bringing artists into Montana communities and connecting audiences with that great work. Our mission is to encourage the touring and presentation of the performing arts throughout Montana in a professional and cost-effective manner. And as you can see here, we receive a lot of support from some great organizations, including the National Endowment for the Arts, the Montana Arts Council, our regional arts organization, Creative West, and also the Montana Cultural Trust. And this series, or this webinar is part of a series called the Connect and Learn Lab. There's a QR code here, and I can also put a link in the chat if you'd like to look at future sessions that we'll have coming up in the next few months and going on through into 2027. Just a couple of quick things before I hand it off. We are using Zoom, and this is a screenshot of what my Zoom controls look like. So if you're on a desktop computer using your browser, you can mute and unmute yourself. Go ahead and stay on mute for the workshop in case you have any background noise, but you're also welcome to come off mute to ask a question out loud if you'd like to. If you prefer, you can also put your question into the chat. That's sort of in the middle section right here. And I'll be monitoring the chat as well. If you'd also like to use the React function, you can hit that button in the middle and raise your hand, or use any of the emojis that you feel like using if something really speaks to you. There's also closed captions on this app, so that's on the right-hand side for me. You can use that to have the captions read along with the presentation. You can also use it to open up the transcript. And there are more settings if you click on those three dots that you can explore if you need anything. And of course, if you're having any issues, you can put a message in the chat or message me directly in the chat. Just let me know, or you can even actually email me. I'll put my email in the chat as well if you're having any technical difficulties, and I'll do my best to help you. So that's all that I have right now for announcements. I'm going to go ahead and close this and hand it off to our guests, Dave Moss and Margaret Chapman from the Unfunded List.
There we are.
There you are.
Always fun.
Our headshots there.
Yeah. Look at us. Oh, we're in brightly colored jackets. That kind of
I should have done the one more button.
Oh,
I think
I'm in purple there. I'm in purple here today. I didn't plan that.
Next time we're at a headshot booth.
Yeah.
We should redo them. Greetings, everyone. We're going to talk about rejection as a resource. We were just talking earlier about whether or not folks in the arts are better suited to the process of submitting proposals because so much of art creation involves rejection as well. I think that's true. I also think that the process, particularly I used to be an actor. Margaret is a producer and is still involved with a players troupe. But the process of notes, right? You have a rehearsal, people give you notes, and then you're able to improve based off of the notes. Is something that many artists are familiar with. And today we're gonna talk a little bit about the history of grant proposals and how the philanthropy field got to where it is today. And we're going to introduce Unfunded List, the nonprofit that I founded, which is a way to get notes on your grant proposals. I'm Dave Moss. I lived in DC for a long time. I was a fundraiser. I submitted a lot of proposals, got rejected on a lot. I also was an actor. I auditioned for a lot of things and mostly got rejected there. I think, but with both my grant proposals and my auditions, I think rejection was the most common outcome. But still, got a lot of grants, got a lot of good parts. And now I run a nonprofit that reviews grant proposals. Margaret, would you like to introduce yourself briefly before we begin?
Sure. Hello. Besides enjoying purple, I live in the DC area still, and my background is actually finance. So I spent the last 20 years working in a variety of different types of operations, finance, fundraising, all that sort of fun stuff. There's a reason those all begin with an F because they're all fun. And then I also, like you said, work in a lot of community theater in the DC area. So I chair the board of the St. Mark's Players, which is the only community theater in DC proper. And in fact, was last night at the I'm meeting for the Little Theater of Alexandria, which is one of the older community theaters in Northern Virginia. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today to share what I've been working on in addition to all of those things for the last 10 years, Unfunded List, and all the things that we can hopefully help you guys with to improve your access to grant funding.
Thank you, Margaret.
You're welcome.
So now we can go to the next slide here. Margaret and I have been working on we have a time travel machine, and it only works over Zoom, sometimes Google Meet. It's a very limited time machine, you'll come to learn. It allows us to briefly check in on important moments in grant proposal history, specifically in the US. Before really diving into any endeavor, I think it is valuable to learn the history behind it. Grant proposals are a big part of my life, Margaret's too, and a lot of yours as well, I suspect. But it's a very new concept in human history, as we'll see, as opposed to theater, right, which has been around since, Thespis first stepped out of the chorus or whatever. I guess even longer than that, right? But there are really, I know, so like Stanislavski's method is hundreds of years older than modern philanthropy, right? So philanthropy really hasn't had a whole lot of time to establish best practices or common language or the kind of common language and stuff that we see in the arts. And I think that can actually cause when we're talking about some of the ways in which artists are well suited to this, that can cause a lot of friction, I think, because philanthropy isn't always as clear cut, right, as a well-run arts organization can be. Right. So yeah, we want to leave plenty of time for questions and commentary and stuff. But so we'll make our first stop in the time machine. Sometimes I like rumble the here we go. We're going way back, right? This picture here represents most of fundraising throughout history. In order to do it, you yourself had to be some sort of accordion collar wearing lord, right? Pumpkin pants and a little rapier. Or you had to be able to get to court in the first place. Like, see those men? That man with the big stick there, he would have stopped if you're just some pauper or whatever, or some artist looking for funding, right? He probably would have stopped you. He wouldn't let you in there at all. Right? So you had to be able to get your way into court and know the king and everything and make a formal request and calligraphy and all of that. Here we see, right, this gentleman almost certainly is requesting, right, funding to displace some people or steal some land or one of the other king's priorities. But this is, I mean, it's important to remember that philanthropy is a new field. This is what, for most, in order to get funding for things, right? You might imagine this could be, right, Shakespeare or someone like that trying to get funding for their arts. Right? It was from the government, from royalty, right? One of the things that I like about America, right, is it is not just the government, it's not just the king that does that makes these big decisions, that decides what projects gets funded.
I'm an agent, neither of us knows what we're talking about.
Excuse me.
I'll go back and see. It's like, what do you mean?
Is that stray noise or is it a question? Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay. Yep. So, let's move. We'll move out of ancient history into a cool event in American philanthropy history. Another Margaret. We're introducing a new Margaret has entered the chat.
Oh, and she is so I will be super brief today, but
Thank you. Yeah.
if, if you would like to know more about this lady after I talk a little bit about her, there is one definitive source on her, Mrs. Russell Sage. You can also listen to a recent podcast that I did for Unfunded List's podcast, Open Door Philanthropy, where I talk to Dimple Abichambadi about Gilded Age philanthropy generally, and we focus on Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage. So, besides having a really great name, she also has a lot to contribute to grants generally and the philanthropic sector. So, for most of her life, she, was a traditional wealthy woman, being brought up and raised and then, living in New York. Her husband made a ton of money. He passed away in 1906. Up to that point, he was incredibly, we'll use the word frugal. And he didn't like to give a lot of it away. So upon his death, she decides that she is actually going to do the opposite, and she is just going to spend as much of it as she can for the betterment of society, right? So that is her aim. And she puts it in the newspaper, like not necessarily as an ad, but like makes a statement that my goal is to see that my funds go to improve society. And so she is flooded with letters. So this is 1906, 1907. So, there's no internet, there's no application portal for people to submit through. You got to write a hard copy letter, send it to wherever you might track her down to her address, and then someone has to read it. She was inundated by these requests, most of which were from individuals looking for very kind of mundane, we would think, activities, just to help with the daily aspects of life in the early 1900s. Uh, so she actually started one of the very first private foundations, the Russell Sage Foundation, 1907. And in fact, there are laws that are passed right around the same time that actually create this as an entity, create the idea of a private foundation as an entity. And she creates one of the first ones. She's kind of fascinating because she actually does give a lot to the arts, in contrast to a lot of her Gilded Age compatriots, so Carnegie and whatnot. She is very focused on what today we might consider some progressive causes, women's issues, suffrage, all these things, including she did give quite a bit to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and was very specifically wanting to fund artistic endeavors. But she was not able to provide feedback to all these people who wanted money, right? They essentially went down a black hole. People wrote to her. Some people got money, some people didn't. Most of them didn't. And they just were never heard from again, right? She actually read most of them at the very beginning. She and a small group of people she trusted literally read and where they could answer the letters, but unfortunately it became too much. And we have what we consider some of the beginnings of modern philanthropy through this private foundation model, where money is set aside. Russell Sage Foundation sets aside X amount of dollars every year. They have priorities that are things she feels compelled to fund, and they focus on those items and those items only for the most part. So setting us up to go from kings and queens to we have a matrix, an algorithm that says, here's what we fund, here's what we don't, and here's how you ask for it. So again, I could go on for a very long time about her. So
Yes.
listen to the podcast or read the book if you want to know more.
Thank you I was actually going to remind you to be brief, knowing your passion for this other Margaret.
It's true.
So thank you for taking it upon yourself there. But it is true. Her experience did largely contribute to a tax bill happens in 1907 that it creates the first foundations.
Mhm.
And so a lot of modern, we're going to go briefly out the window of the time machine. We can go to the next slide now, I think. We'll be able to see some 20th century stuff here. So generally, history being what it is, right? The names of the men are the ones that more people have heard, right? Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, right? More household names than Margaret, which I think is silly.
I'm working to change that
Um,
one
but
podcast at a time.
the fact that they were household names in business, and then started foundation was a big part. The modern foundation grant making really did follow those three names in particular, and they had similar experiences when it came to trying to do organized grant making, right, and getting inundated with requests, and saw the need to organize right into private foundations. And it's worth noting we're focusing on private philanthropy right now. The government is going through largely the same thing throughout this time, right? They are collecting they start collecting income tax in the early 20th century, and start having more, Congress becomes, I had a boss once who said Congress is basically, it's a foundation with 435 board members, right? If you can get a majority of the board members to want to fund a project, you're going to get like you can get funding for the project, right? It's the same with a foundation. But Congress becomes largely a funding institution, and the U.S. government is given doling grants out. In fact, even I believe we saw right the NEA is funding this very thing, at least a partner in this very thing we're doing today. Right. So there's several tax like the history of philanthropy and the history of tax reform are like kind of mirror each other in the U.S. In 1969 is a big another big moment. Foundation in particular, foundations are required to report their grant making publicly at that point, and it was either that time or like shortly after that that they're then established. Like you may have heard, may be aware. So if you're a private foundation registered with the IRS, you get some tax benefits. And one of the things you promise is that you're going to give away 5% of your endowment every year. So you're going to give away X, no matter what your endowment is, you're going to give away at least 5% of it in grants. And you're going to report on which registered organizations you're going to give those grants to. That's from the Tax Reform Act of '69, which may seem right if we've got some young folks on the call, that may seem like ancient history, right? But it's really not that long ago that they've been doing that. So the concept of the grant proposal and RFPs and program officers operating as great gatekeepers, some other buzzwords like invite only proposals and things like that, and any kind of innovation in philanthropy. These are all 1970s. None of these things are that much older than I am, basically. As we exit the 20th century. A couple things to note. Basically, there's been no transparency or accountability on this field, really. Um, Important to note. One of the reasons why it doesn't change that rapidly. And big bet the things that were really popular at the end of this are big bet philanthropy, right? Moonshot. They're talking about moonshots a lot back then, right? And Gates and others, and being it's not these aren't foundations established in the memory of these big names. These people are alive and actively participating in it. That was a big thing going on at the turn of the century. We will continue to go forward through time, and the next slide will bring us to the
Oh,
there.
that guy.
There he is. It wasn't there. I think you missed the slide, possibly.
No.
Oh, no. What happened to the 21st century? Oh, there it is. Sorry. I don't know how he got there. I guess he happened in the 21st century. We'll talk about him first. We'll go back. His name's Dr. Solomon. So he's a funder. You can tell kind of by looking at him there, that he's a philanthropist. He led several trainings on a variety of different philanthropy topics that I attended. He ran a foundation called Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies, and he wrote a book, The Art of Giving. And it was sort of about the process of giving away grants. It's a decent read, and he has a lot of experience. He gave away hundreds of millions of dollars in his career. He's one of the more significant philanthropists of the turn of the century here, which is a weird phrase to be saying now. Realize that the century was over. Century turned over a quarter century ago. Um, so I'm on the board of it. In 2007, I'm on the board of a giving circle that's considering funding a variety of organizations, including some arts organizations and some others. And it's that our giving circle is matched in grants by Dr. Solomon's the foundation that he runs. And part of the process is going to involve us rejecting grants. So like we're people who got site visits are going to then not get grants, and we want to be able to follow up with them and tell them that they're not getting the grant. So this was a declination training. We were joking. This is a declination, right? It's used sometimes by I guess mountaineers and climbers and stuff about steep declines. That's not what we mean here. He's not training me to go down the stairs, right? He's talking about how to decline gracefully, right, in grant program, right? He's had something he's had to do professionally many times. He was an experienced person to be doing this, so I was kind of excited to go to the training. At the time, I was a grant writer, and I was involved in this funding program, so I was taking this very seriously for my own interest in professional development and wanted to do a good job with the program and everything. So I went to this training, and I'm going to summarize. I'm not going to do it as well as he did, but um, basically he said, and this I found this frustrating at the time. I do generally I've come over time to agree with him, I think, but at the time found it frustrating. He thinks, one, you should never give any real specific feedback to a grantee that you're rejecting. He's saying this from the perspective of someone who runs a foundation, right? You should not give them specific feedback because the power dynamics at play really sort of make that impossible to be a productive conversation. And you really need to be focused on your actual grantees. Particularly when you're talking to like a professional development director, their job is to sort of try to keep the conversation going. So any sort of declination conversation that has specifics in it, you're going to be giving them tools to keep the conversation going. So the way he described it was that you want to take a ball, like a silver, maybe greasy ball, no cracks, no handholds, nothing to get, no friction at all, nothing you can get your hands on, and you want to hand it to somebody, right? And right, watch them drop it and stumble to pick it back up. Right? You don't want to if you give them something to grab onto. Let's say you say, well, we didn't think the budget looked very sustainable, and so that's why the committee didn't fund it. Well, then any development director is going to say, yeah, but it is sustainable. We can give you this information or that. We can show it, right? But at that point, you've made the decision, and that's not a very productive conversation to be having. Perhaps it'd be useful for the organization to hear those things, but that's not really, going to work out. And let's say you say, hey, we wanted you to reach more participants here, and then they change their programming to try to reach more participants, right? Then you've altered the mission and scope of this organization, right? That's what he means by the power dynamics being awkward in that. So he really was sort of advising, not giving any specifics. If you go out there into the world, you'll notice that like this is the general best practice advice that they give to funders. I once earlier, Mike, around the same time, I applied to a variety of foundations and got rejected from them. And one day, the rejection letters used to come in the mail back then. And I got two on the same day, and they were the same. They were from two different organizations, like the names and stuff were different, but they were the same letter. Like the language was the same. They copied and pasted the paragraph from a resource on like I just reverse Googled it and found it myself. Right? There's a website online that was like how to reject grants. And it's just it's probably language that many of you have seen, right? It's unfortunately we got more requests than we were able to fund, right? And sort of that sort of standard boilerplate language and that has really become the best practice of grant writing. So we'll go forward a little bit through the 21st century here. I realize I may have painted Dr. Solomon in a poor light. He really is a very wise man. And the advice he was giving was from, many decades of experience in giving large grants. Including he funded many arts institutions. So throughout the 21st century and into now, this is something that's going on here. And I meant to add another point to this, but forgot. So one, we've continued to not really have very much transparency or accountability, particularly when it comes to private philanthropy, but a little bit more. There is some more scrutiny going on now of philanthropists than there was in the previous century. So perhaps I should give them more credit. But one of the things going on right now is there's been, it may seem like there's less available now. And that may be true by the numbers. Like there may be applications probably went up by even more than you'll see these dollars went up here. right? So like when I started as a fundraiser, there was, 27 to 30, I remember 25 to 30 billion. I remember being taught that at my like one of my first grant seeking jobs. Like that was the amount available from private foundations. It's well over 100. I'm being pretty conservative here on the 2026 numbers. And like for next year, it's going to be larger than that. Some very, very large foundation, like billion plus foundations have been established recently. So the number's going to go up very high, right? If you want to be very optimistic about it, a lot of the new wealth that has been created will translate into philanthropy, and that will be beneficial to lots of organizations, including the arts. You could be more cynical and assume that that these new wealth creators are just going to hoard their wealth. We'll see. We'll have to see how that goes. But a lot of the money is ending up in DAFs, foundations. We've seen a lot of growth in those things, which does mean there's a lot of funding available from foundations. But right, there is now right back in ancient history, the king never rejected you himself. You never really got the chance to apply in the first place, right? Or your letters just sort of got ignored, right? Right. The more, yes, there is all of this accessible funding, but there's also just an increasing amount of need, and inundated is a word that we're hearing a lot from program foundation officers, and many foundations that have staff and stuff internally, what they're thinking about is their declination process, right? And how are they going to reject these grants? And a lot of them, unfortunately, are following the sort of best practice advice we heard from Dr. Solomon. So we will move forward. It was 2015. This is the next slide, I think. Yes, 2015. I founded Unfunded List. It's simple, right? It is based on several things. My parents were academics, and I thought a lot about like the dissertation defense process and how, right, the people got notes on their dissertation from their peers and stuff, and there was a thoughtful reviewer process in place. And I thought there should be something like that in grant making. And similar to, I think, like I mentioned before, doing rehearsal, getting notes from the people who saw the rehearsal, right, and then doing it again. I thought that if grant writers could have that process, especially since I knew from my experience that funders weren't really interested in providing it, right, we thought that this could be quite beneficial. So we will take anyone with a proposal of any kind. And Margaret and I both have arts backgrounds. We talk often in our weekly check-ins about how we would like more proposals from arts organizations. We're both from rural states as well. I'm here in Maine. These are some Maine trees behind me. Margaret's from West Virginia, where we're speaking in a couple months. So we would love more arts proposals from a rural state like Montana or wherever. I know some of you are from other places. But we will read anything. We get lots of health and youth serving organizations, international development organizations. We get all kinds of different proposals. I have a lot of evaluators. I was just onboarding some folks this morning. We have 750 confirmed reviewers in our learning community. So these are people who've signed up to read grant proposals and give notes. So we are currently accepting proposals. September 20th is the deadline for this round. Send us a proposal wherever you've applied. If you've applied for government funding, you've applied to a private foundation, city, municipal, county funding, whatever grant proposal you've written up for funding your program, we've got evaluators that would love to read it for you. We'll assign it to them, put feedback from multiple evaluators into a report, and then you get the opportunity to talk with Margaret and I about your proposal and the feedback you received. That's how that works. We can go to the next slide. Thank you again, Emily, for your help. So since 2015, here's some of what we've done. We've read over 1,500 proposals. I don't know how many of them are arts organizations. At least 100, I would think. Margaret, wouldn't you say?
I'd say probably. Yes. I feel like it ebbs and flows. Sometimes some years we'll get several and some years we'll get like one. And it's usually the same one.
Yes, there are a few arts organizations that have been back.
Submitted over and over again.
We had more. I think this last round we did have 12, yeah, including MPAC, which we had a proposal from Emily. But some decent representation from arts organizations, 12 of them. Out of the 96 we reviewed last spring. We had 250 evaluators participate, and we've had 1,300 evaluators participate over all of our rounds since 2015. We produced a total of 854 reviews. And so which meant everybody heard from like at least 9 different reviewers. Our reviewers do a variety of different things. Some of them are artists. Most of them are like grants consultants, or they're like work in a grants office or in a fundraising office, or they work in a nonprofit. We have a decent number, I would say like a third of them work in funding, right? They're like a program officer at a foundation or otherwise interested in funding, and just trying to keep their proposal reviewing skills sharp. It's a great way to learn reviewing with us. You're all encouraged to join, read some proposals. I'll assign stuff that's based on your interest. Whatever you tell me you want to read, I will show it to you. And we make it very easy for you to read the proposal and provide some notes and put that into a report for you and everything. So those are the two main ways to participate in our program. You send a proposal to us or you review proposals. You can do both if you want. We love the folks that do both. We've done a few impact studies over the years. In general, we found that 9 out of 10 organizations see their fundraising increase, with the average increase being about 213%. Over that same period of time, the field increased about 30%. So we're having a outsized increase impact, I think. We had a partnership last year where we funded we reviewed a number of organizations, and then the survey from that, 17 out of 18 of those folks said 5 out of 5 they would submit again. The 18th was 4 out of 5. And I would note did submit again. So that 18 person did submit another proposal. So you can take of that what you will. Yeah, that was our last round. What did I have another slide? I don't think so.
Yes, I think because we were going to talk about some
Yes.
case studies.
And here are some testimonials from some folks from last round. But I also, because Margaret had, when we do the report discussions, it's usually Margaret or I. And generally we do that somewhat based on our we have complementary skill sets. Margaret has, an MBA, which I do not have, and she's better with budgets, and she's also got more of an arts administrator background. So I think you've spoken with most of the more arts organizations. I mean, I've spoken with some, but I think you've spoken with more. What are some of your favorite experiences from reviewing proposals from arts organizations?
Yeah, and so I will say, just to kind of back it up a little bit, when he was talking about some of the rejection, getting feed, as you guys mentioned, I think it was Heather who mentioned it, that it's really hard to get feedback, from the funder, and it's so true. That's why we exist, literally, is because it is so incredibly difficult. And I think especially because a lot of the times the funders that we see for arts organizations, especially, are either small foundations that want to fund like super hyper local arts, or they're like the NEA. So if you're, with going for the NEA, like, yeah, you actually do get some feedback. That's one really nice thing about some of the federal and other agency type grants, is that you often do get something in writing that says, here's a matrix and here's how you did. It doesn't necessarily highlight, what they would like to have seen, but at least it gives you something to go on, right? I actually, for a client of mine, got this the other day, and I was really excited to see that the budget section got a 9.9 out of 10. So I was like, all right, we were rejected, but I know it
Of course
wasn't
it did.
Huh?
Of course it did.
Of course it did. So I was like, the program got rejected. I didn't write that part, but I wrote the budget and it was solid.
Very confirming for you.
It was very confirming for me. But that makes it hard, right? Especially as an arts organization, because you are often applying to some smaller organizations and smaller funders that don't have capacity to give you anything as far as feedback. So I've gotten the chance to chat with a lot of groups that have applied to us. A lot because we actually have a lot of organizations in the DC area who apply to Unfunded List and get feedback. And I see I'd say things across the board are just some of the highlights of trends and the feedback that I've seen. There's always this tension, especially I feel like in arts organizations, between the like narrative, here's all the touchy-feely stuff that we do, and the data. Because as an arts organization, you're really into storytelling and you want to tell the story of what you do, and you want to share the experience of Jackie, who has gone through our children's theater program and now is on Broadway. A local program actually has this. So like, they want to tell that story. But the funder also wants to hear, okay, well, that's awesome for Jackie. How many kids actually went through the program and what are some other outcomes, like in terms of data, besides Jackie's narrative story? And I find that this is often a real point of tension with organizations, especially arts organizations, to find that sweet spot of telling both stories at the same time. Um, One of the things we often talk about on the feedback calls, and I really love when I get to chat with a group and we dig into one or two issues that they're having, and really kind of work out how to make this better. And one thing we often come up with, especially for the theaters and this group called Story Tapestries around here that has multiple programs, um, theirs in particular, they have a lot of different things going on. And I find that one nice way to use the narrative is to answer some of the feedback that we often get, which is, I don't really know what your program does. It sounds cool, but I don't know what you do. So in the program writing, when you're writing that proposal, you have the data. We serve 1,500 kids in the DC area. We have these 15 different programs, blah, blah, blah. And then tell the story of what you actually do on a daily basis through the narrative lens. Um, so that's one trend that I so often see, especially in arts organizations, is that tension between those two. Also, because it's not as easy to get data in arts. Yeah, like, what data do you use? Do you use how many people come to our shows? Do you
Yep.
use, how many people go through our educational programs? Um, like, what are the metrics here that make the most sense? It's a little
And
bit easier.
you have highlighted, so these are,
Yeah,
when we did some analysis of all of the, and we did 854 reviews, right? We did some analysis of like what kinds of comments people were making. And these are you've hit on two of the like major kind of, particularly for arts organizations. I think this is a struggle for arts organizations, right? You may like we put on the play, we put on the play. And what you're doing there is you're describing an activity, you put on the play, right? Right. Well, there's funders that will fund based on descriptions of activities. They like the description of the play that was put on. They will fund based off of that description. There are a lot of increasingly there's more funders that want at least outputs, right? We put on the play and this many people came to see the play, right? They want to the fund, particularly government funders and stuff. They've like, our the funding is to reach this many people, right? So we need to be able to see these numbers in order to be able to make our funding decisions, right? A private One of the benefits to individual donors and family foundations is they're less burdened by the regulation and the funding bills and stuff, and they can make their own decisions because they like the play, they like the art, right? That's why I think individual patronage is probably the ideal model for arts organizations, but when it comes to these institutional opportunities, they do exist, right? And the key there really is to like, you got to zoom into there. So another thing that has come up a lot, I think, and this is sort of attention in a lot of different directions, right? Because they're inundated with proposals, they have strict character limits on their applications. That really limits the ability to tell stories, which everyone agrees is an important part of the application process. But at the same time, we're giving you these character limits, and that is something that I'm certainly talking about in the report discussions a lot with folks. Like, you're telling me to tell a story, right? But I had 100 characters. Right? How was I supposed to? And that's a very real, some of that's on the funder. Sometimes that's all we can say to those organizations. But we are seeing it like beyond on an individual, like it was certainly something that came up in like the data when we looked at all the comments, like across all 96 different proposals from different sectors that we were looking at, is that very few of them were telling a story of a participant. And there are many examples of reviewers, like hundreds of reviewers saying, I want you to tell me one story of one participant, right? And we saw the art, and then we were affected this way, right? Which is there's also funders that are beyond activities and outputs, then there's outcomes. And this is the one that a lot of organizations are struggling with. They can tell you how many people came to see the play, right? How were those people's lives changed after they saw the play? That is a very like funders love that stuff. Their thirst for that kind of outcome data will never be sated. But from your perspective, from our perspective as practitioners, it's very different. Like, how am I supposed to know that? I can't follow them home after they see the play, right? Like how are we going to get like there are ways to get that data. It's a lot of work. It's something you're going to have if you want to get funding from funders that for whom outcomes are important. And hopefully when you do your research on the funders, you learn that, right? Then otherwise, right, you may have to focus only on funders that fund based off of activities, right? And the key is to really sort of know all of these things beforehand and get feedback from unfunded list evaluators so that you can sort of sharpen these things up, right? And sometimes it is worth spending some characters on a story. And I also do like I mentioned a lot of the times, like Shakespeare had strict character limits in the sonnets and he still managed to get a lot of good ones out, right? And there's haikus and there's lots of other examples of artists operating in strict character limits. And actually, I found that to be like kind of like sometimes I inspire folks who are frustrated by character limits, right, to get them to think that way. And it's certainly when any great writer will tell you writing is removing words, it's not adding words, right? And I think that that is something that proposals have in common with all other kinds of formats. I have a couple of my favorite. I'm remembering now there was an arts organization, it's a theater group in New York that was having a lot of success with it. The people who came to the theater and saw the plays were very supportive, but they also had this like social impact programming they were doing. A lot of their plays were tied to the activities of certain nonprofits, and they were trying to tell stories that would help you to better understand the work of the nonprofit, right? And a lot of it had to do with like immigrant communities and things of that nature. And they were trying to get funding from institutional funders. And they were really struggling because they were really leaning in on the storytelling, actually. They had like no, they were barely even describing their activities. They were just sort of like being very artsy and creative with their proposal in a way that probably just confused the proposal reviewing committee, really. We were able to have and that was funny. I was able to have a very interesting conversation with them. And then I remember they tried to, this is going to sound like a brag, and it is. She tried to cast me. She was doing some sort of like dinner theater in upstate New York, and she wanted to know if I was available. She had a part for me. It was fun. That's one and only one report discussion where that someone tried to cast me in a performance. And then there was one very early on. We had an arts organization, and this we learned a lot from this experience. So the very passionate young man who had a very good idea for a project, but he was taking sort of a GoFundMe approach to how it would be funded. Like he had the timeline in mind for it. Like I'm going to do it on these dates, and this is when it's going to happen by this time. You need to fund it by this time, right? And I was trying to explain to him that like, well, the funder's timeline is their timeline. Like you can get this project, a version of this project funded, but you'll need to like spend some time building relationships and talking on that. And he was ultimately sort of too impatient for that approach and chose to go his own route. But I think it is the artists are very different, creative, cool individuals. As opposed to, lots of times our report discussions are with like the grants manager at a community health center, right? And those are fun conversations as well, but like I always really like the arts organization. So I do hope some of you will consider sharing your proposals with us, or perhaps joining the committee and providing some reviews as well. Margaret, did you have any other arts organizations that we've reviewed or you've spoken to that you want to talk about, or anything else you wanted to add?
Sure. I mean, there's lots I could go on forever and ever. I will
Okay.
say this couple of the ones I mentioned, Story Tapestries is one a really great one.
Yeah.
My friend actually runs the American Alliance for Theater and Education. So if you guys do anything around theater and education, you should definitely look them up. And that one I've been able to work with her for many, many years on grant writing and developing fundraising for them. And there, to Dave's point about, knowing your funder and what is the best method for you. That's one thing we've really been working on for them is that they have written some grants, but they've really decided that large dollar donors are their best bet right now. So really kind of looking at your fundraising as a whole as well and figuring out what is the best fit for your arts organization. Um, and then, one of the biggest things for takeaway forever and ever is if you know one funder, you know one funder. So to the point about whether you include more narrative, more data, if you use certain language, if how you phrase your budget, what kind of things you ask for, all of those things. The number one reason that I see folks getting declined, we're not going to use the word rejected, declined, is because they weren't a great fit in the way they wrote the proposal.
Yes.
Even if they were a great fit generally, the way they wrote the proposal didn't show that, and it wasn't clear. You've got one of the biggest things is you have to make it 100% clear, especially now because we're seeing so many organizations across the board go to more private funding because of the cuts at the federal level. That you have to stand out and make it no question whatsoever why you are a 150% fit. And that means doing a deep dive on the funder to know, do they like data? Do they want outcomes versus outputs? What kind of things do they like to fund? Who have they funded in the past? All of those things are so important. And that is what I would consider the number one reason that folks don't get funding, is because they just don't make the case as clearly.
Particularly in our folks, I think, that if the folks out there who are getting funding, right, they're probably seeking feedback elsewhere. Like, we're not the only way to get feedback. Right. And they're probably, I think the groups getting the most funding probably have very strong pre-application relationships with all of their funders. So they're able to figure out these things. A lot of the stuff we see, of course, is from people who are, a lot of people it's never gotten a grant before, right? Very, very beginners at this. Right. And so that is certainly, I think, but there's also savvy teams. I mean, we had well-known, household brands from last round that were just sort of trying to send the same proposal to every shop in town.
Mm.
Right, without any real, just sort of swapping in the name of the funder name here, right? And every now and then, like that, we've had proposals we reviewed where we're like the wrong funder's name is in the proposal, and stuff like that. So we've got certainly some time left here. I think on the next slide will be, what is on the next slide?
That's it.
There is no next slide. That's the last slide.
No next
But
slide.
I can bring up your homepage.
Oh, there it is.
Yep. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
There's Dr. Kim. I just did this is a new podcast episode we put out yesterday. I interviewed, he does not fund in the arts, unfortunately. But my last episode, I interviewed a guy named Bill Villafranco. That was a very good podcast episode. And the foundation is called the Virginia B. Toolman Foundation. And they do fund arts organizations. He had a lot of insightful things to say about, from the funder perspective. There's several other arts funders and such on lots of good content on the podcast and website here. You can also submit a proposal, as you can see, or join the evaluators with us.
So, I do.
Looks like we've got a question.
Questions. Oh, yeah, sorry, I was going to just say that. I was like, yeah, we have a couple questions.
Go ahead, Marion.
Thank you both so much for your wisdom, and I'm very impressed that you actually have a career doing this. That's wonderful.
Good. Thank you.
So what my question is, it seemed from the history that you were speaking mostly of foundational grants.
Yes.
Do you also, okay, my question is going to be multiple things, so maybe listen through. So most of my grant writing is more of the government agencies, and sometimes what you were talking about wording can even be for an application for pitching my artist or something like that. So part of my question is, have you seen the political changes around DEI affecting the way foundational funders react to funding opportunities? And if you are also involved with governmental funding, I'm pretty sure federal grants have been reduced, and the ones that still exist require a different wording, to say the least. And I found myself writing this proposal yesterday and being really nervous about the way I wrote what I wrote, because it feels like everything is it's such a hotbed. And so I asked my artists of color to read it and tell me what they thought, because I thought they're going to have a better sensitivity to this than I am. But I wondered if you could address any of those topics.
But so that's all very relevant to our work. Everything you just said is, I was thinking of direct examples. We did have a proposal we reviewed, either this most recent or I know it was the round before, and it was an application, it was an NEA, it was from an artist group, and it was to the NEA, and I think they had been funded by the NEA and by in a previous administration, with a proposal that used a lot of language around inclusivity, and things of that sort. And the proposal that they shared with us for feedback was like their new language, right? For the new, there is some funding coming out of the NEA, but you're going to want to, and I think the current moment is a particularly stark one. But I found this organization in 2015, early, in fact, was when I started working on it. And so, right, there was, even back then, we used to say to folks, right, any kind of federal grants, right, the winds have changed. A new administration may come in, and there may be different priorities, right? Federal grants are very tricky for that reason, right? That's going to remain true. But we certainly have directly, in that one case with she was trying out new language specifically for the NEA, and we gave her some feedback, and Margaret, I think, spoke to her. Lots of the folks that we reviewed have been directly affected. The vast majority of the folks we reviewed have been directly affected by federal cuts to grants. So a lot of them are, right. They lost a federal grant, and they need to fill up. Their bosses and boards have told them they have to go to private philanthropy, and it's generally a different approach. We do review federal submissions, including some like fairly complicated, right? We've reviewed some like NIH stuff. I'm trying to think what some of the medical research proposals, HRSA grants. Last round we had some grants that I myself, when I look at them, I have no idea what's going on in there. But some of our reviewers are very experienced, and that's the kind of stuff that they want to dive into to keep their skills sharp. And we have 750 evaluators of all different stripes. So it's always easy for us to find a million or more folks to join a.
Yeah, and to your question about the foundation side, I do think that foundations are responding in two different
Right, and
ways. And they're either doubling down, right? So they are, reinforcing previous funder or previous grantees, or really going after the grantees that are being left behind by other funders. Or they are taking the more conservative, like government funded approach, where they're saying, yes, we recognize, that this is an important thing, but we're not using the language because we also maybe get ourselves funding from the government, or we have partners that get funding from the government. So there's not one singular avenue that foundations are taking. And that's where, again, really to studying the individual funder and figuring out where they are on that spectrum of language and positioning before you start writing, so that oh, they are one of the ones that has doubled down. They're very happy in this space and happy to be there and supportive during all of this. Or no, they had to take a step back and they're still funding, but they're not using the language that they maybe did before. They're still in the realm, but you just be careful about how you talk about it. And that is really a thing that's going on as well.
One of the things that I've been asking most of the funders that I talk to, and I'm generally dissatisfied with the answers they've been giving me. They'll all tell me that they are getting more proposals than previously. And some of them have increased their like grant payout rates a little bit to make up for that, but none of them will admit clearly, I don't think anyway, that they've increased it by the amount that they're getting 6 times as many proposals. Maybe they're increasing their payout rate by 10 or 15%. They're not meeting the need, and it's also mathematically impossible for them to meet the need. So like even if I think somebody did a study and foundations would have to increase their payout rate to 117%, which is of course impossible. They would be going into debt, right? And so they're not going to be able to meet the need from the federal losses. And they're getting more proposed, like six times. I've heard that from multiple different foundations, that they're going to get 6 times the applications this year than they got last year. And I'm like, well, did you hire more? How are you reading that many applications? Like, did you hire more program officers. And like none of them are really giving me a very satisfactory answer about how they're handling the increased volume. And I think the reason for that is just a lot of them are not going to be like the ones that they don't have any kind of relationship with, they just aren't going to really be read seriously, is the short answer there.
And
Uh, but yeah,
and
these kinds of topics are very common. Pretty much everything because you were sort of checking things off a list there comes up in detail with a lot of the groups that we're reviewing proposals for sure.
And to that point, like, this is one area of knowledge about grant writing, but we have a ton of other resources on our website. So we have one whole webinar around relationship building with especially foundations. So please feel free to go there and listen to the webinars and the podcast because a lot of the things related to this, we have tried to provide some resources around it from people smarter than us on things like that, right? I mean, there's people who are smarter, maybe not smarter than Dave. I don't know. Definitely smarter than me, and who do this, all day, every
He's
day.
not pretty, smarter than me, but not pretty.
So so a couple of those, please go there and listen to those because I think they will provide a little bit deeper dive into some of the things that you're asking questions about, or that are tangential to things you're asking questions about.
Marion has
Go-
Oh,
she has
yeah.
another question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've been noticing lately that a lot of people's stuff sounds the same, and that because I use AI from time to time, I've noticed certain phrasing that AI has given me, and it's coming up over and over and over again. Have you noticed that lots of grants are using the same language? And that, I mean, I feel like the personal identity of organizations or artists is being diluted because they're all using the same words that AI generates.
Yeah, so yes and no. We're seeing a pretty big increase in AI. I think a lot of the proposals we read, someone used AI to write them. I do think the key to using AI, and I think that's fine. I think, in fact, in many ways, that's equalizing. For instance, we read proposals from, nonprofits in other countries where they don't speak English as a first language. AI can be very helpful for translating that kind of thing. The thing I'm hearing from funders, I saw a funder panel, and when I get to talk to them, one of the things that rings true, no matter what they're funding, whatever industry it is, they really want to hear community voice in the proposals. That is something that AI is pretty bad at, and in order to use AI to write to express your community's voice, you're going to need to give it. You can't just show it the application and tell it to fill it out. We're not seeing a lot of that. I'm not seeing a lot of like what I would call raw AI output. I do think it's being used responsibly. So, for instance, when I use AI to write things, I don't ever write anything without showing it a large number of my own writing samples. And I have a list of rules. Like, for instance, I don't use M dashes personally. I know that's the one everybody knows about. And I know I don't ever use them. Like I literally don't. I don't think I've ever used an M dash in my own writing. So once I noticed that like AI was very frequently using them, I was like, well, anyone who knows my writing is going to know that this isn't me, right? So I have it pretty hard and fast in my context document to never use them. I prefer parentheses. Like I write, here's some examples of how I would rewrite commonly. Right? It's a very long context document that I spent like a couple days on. And every single prompt I do with the AI, I show it that. And I think I've spoken with a lot of grant writers that who are employing similar approaches. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of the way. And again, you're really going to want to enable it with a lot of information and data and stuff from your community so that it can express that community voice that funders are looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to double check and see if there are any other questions from anyone else in the room. Feel
I've
free to
certainly
come
got a
off
few more
mute
minutes.
or go ahead and pop it in the chat. But yeah, thank you for that question. I've been wondering about that too. I am the sole employee of my organization, and this is not even a full-time job. So AI
Yeah.
honestly has been a game changer for building,
Mhm.
like creating more capacity to apply for more grants. And
That's a
um,
big part of the reason why these folks are receiving more. I think for them, I think that's probably I believe the primary reason is federal cuts. I
mhm,
think a lot of foundations think AI is the primary reason.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
there's probably a lot more, there is a lot of skepticism from them when it comes to this.
yeah.
I don't think one of the things they're telling me unanimously though is that while they may use AI for like shortlisting, like determining eligibility, right? Just like the basics and
Mhm.
stuff, they're not going to be using them to like actually make, they're really, there's no plans from leadership in philanthropy to use them to like actually make decisions and stuff. Is
Looks
there
like we've got another
anyone
question from Heather
manually
too.
raising? Are you
I
manually raising your hand?
I can't find the hand raise on here. I don't
You're
know.
very,
Oh,
you're
I
like
don't know
very
where it,
tiny on my screen, and I could,
yeah.
I think her hand is
I
up.
don't know where it moved. Um, I've been finding less opportunities to apply for U.S. Embassy grants, but is that
Yes,
a
that's
kind of grant that you help with?
yeah.
Like if I
In the past,
We have gotten several of those.
when they existed, you're finding they don't exist either?
I believe at the moment, I think there's like an actual directive to not fund anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually
It
used to
used
get
to be that
there's a
consular
lot of
officers could do grants up to like 29.5 or something, some random number that like you only needed a small number of people at a consular office or something like that. But yeah, we've read a dozen or more embassy,
yeah,
and
we used to get
in a previous like I used to work in international exchange, and
Mhm.
I personally got quite a few grants from embassies and stuff.
I mean,
So
that's where I got a lot of my funding for international work. But like, if, in deciding what I might submit to you, could submitting a past one of those could still help me. I think.
whatever you we read, it's a pretty it's meant to be kind of universal, right? Like you
Mhm.
can, I mean, with very few exceptions, I guess there's things that if it was really technical or like in another language, or like some other or really long, like if you send me a 400-page proposal, I probably can't get that.
Right.
Well, I've been surprised on that. The reviewers will read. We had that 75-page HRSA application last round, which is a problem, one of the most complicated federal grants that exists. And I didn't
Mm.
think, but we had just a bunch of reviewers wanted to like the eager to read it. It's a strange. There, some of them I
Well,
mean, I don't want to look at gift horse in the mouth, but
well, one I did last year, I had the problem that Marion was talking about because I've always women in STEM, science, and women were always women and girls were always in there for the embassy grants, and then it wasn't in there at all, and I had to sort of regroup
yeah,
to be about security systems, you know? So that was
yeah.
very, very odd.
All
Yeah,
right.
no, I mean, I think, but and I again, I think it is particularly noticeable now. But you know, I think if you like, for instance, if you look at education funding in the U.S., right, the kind of stuff that was going in grant proposals in 2000, markedly different than the stuff that was going into if you're trying to fund an education program in 2010 and then in 2020, and who knows what you'll have to be writing in 2030. So, if it was for education department funding or private philanthropy funding, all of that would have been very, very different over time. Again, to my
Mm.
earlier point, this is a very young field that at the moment is kind of rapidly changing. So I do think for international funding, when it comes to private funding, it is a lot of it is focused on women and girls, and it's largely because they know they've seen some cuts to this stuff. It is still like a UN priority, like a lot of the funding at
Okay.
level, and and a lot of European foundations aren't burdened by our political landscape, and they're able to fund, you know, in Africa and other places, right, with a different approach. We'll say I'll try
Yeah,
to.
I guess I need to
Uh,
find how to find international funding that way because I haven't done so far. Anyway.
yeah, no, it is. It's you know, government funding for the arts is, you know, that's something that we might have, you know, we could have made some stops. There's probably several more stops on the with the time travel
Right.
machine we could have made throughout history,
Yeah.
right? It is a fraud. There's a fraud history going back a long time with like back to when kings and queens were primarily funding art. What art gets funded? Who decides what art gets funded is a really major question for society. If you ask me, one of the biggest questions society has to figure out who's going to fund the art that we all get to see and enjoy.
And that'll be our next webinar, probably.
And when you're, you know,
Yep.
I'm not allowed to tell you who to vote for, but I can tell you that when you vote, you can consider these things, right? That
Yep.
our political leaders are the people that decide the funding decisions when it comes to the arts.
Yep. And with that, I think we're about 7 minutes after the hour. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you very much to Dave and
Thank you
Margaret.
for having us. This is
And
fun.
this is
yeah. And do check out the Unfunded List. I'm sure you can get in touch with Dave and Margaret through that website, or feel free to reach out to me or reply to my email that I'll send out with the recording and the slide deck. and a survey. So please do check out all those resources and definitely fill out the survey. It's pretty short. It should take about 5 minutes. That feedback is super important. This series is supported in part by the NEA and Creative West. And so getting feedback from you helps us to fulfill our reporting requirements for them to continue receiving that support. So please do fill that out. And thank you again. Check out the Connect and Learn Lab. We'll be doing more of these in the future. But yeah, take care. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Bye.